What is going on, Bucks fans? Evan Wanish here, back at you with yet another video talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And look, training camp is well underway. We are over 2 weeks into training camp now. The preseason game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers is just about to be here, coming up on Friday the 11th. So I figured we talk about who I thought had been the standout players of training camp for the Buccaneers so far. Now, just because a player isn't on this list doesn't necessarily mean he's been doing bad. It's just that player hasn't stood out to me as much as others. So in today's video, we are going to be discussing that. I was obviously down in Florida for a few days. As you saw, we had a few videos with James. I was down there as a credentialed media member, so I was able to keep a closer eye on a lot of things. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to start off with the quarterbacks, and we're going to talk about two quarterbacks. There's three on the roster. We're going to talk about two, Kyle Trask and John Wolford. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, Baker Mayfield's not on here. It's not that Baker's been bad. I've just been more surprised with what I've seen out of Wolford, out of Trask than Mayfield. Mayfield's clearly flashed. You can clearly tell he has starter experience. He has the charisma. He has the leadership ability. But as far as Trask and Wolford on the field go, Trask particularly looks like a different football player to me, and it's been really, really surprising. He has the more velocity on his throws. His deep ball leaves a little bit to be desired. I think he's missed a few deep balls here and there throughout the different practices that I attended. But like I said, the velocity on his throws, which was a concern I had of his coming into this season, I didn't think he had the strongest arm. Wasn't sure if he'd be able to, make those tight window throws, just because you got to throw them, relatively with high velocity. And there's more zip on his passes now. And a guy like John Wolford, I think, has come in and done a fine job. And the Buccaneers elect to keep three quarterbacks on the roster, which they probably will. I think John Wolford, if Baker Mayfield, if something terrible happens and Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask both have to go down with injury or they're not available to play, I think I'd be perfectly fine with John Wolford starting a game or two for the Buccaneers. Wolford has looked pretty good, especially the one indoor practice. The ball barely touched the ground when Wolford was running the offense. So he's looked very good. And it's a positive sign. Like I said, not a shot at Baker Mayfield. Mayfield hasn't been bad. It's just, to me, those two guys have stood out a bit more. And Kyle Trask has protected the football better than Baker Mayfield. So when Mayfield is standing out, it's either a big play on the offense or it's interception. So I think he's going to want to cut those interceptions out, and hopefully he can do that to make this QB competition, a little bit more interesting. But right now, a competition that looked like it was going to be Baker Mayfield's sure looks like it's going to be a legit competition between Mayfield and Trask. So let's get right into the next group, which is another offensive group. It's tough. I don't have any offensive linemen on here. It's tough to gauge offensive linemen exactly in training camp. But let's go to the wide receivers, and particularly wide receiver depth. We know Mike Evans. We know Chris Godwin. Even Russell Gage has made plays here and there. But I'm talking about the guys lower in the depth chart that I think a lot of people were concerned. The Bucs lost Julio Jones. They lost Scotty Miller. How are they going to replace these guys? Look, the Bucs wide receiver depth could be pretty good this year, and they might, I'm going to list four names here. There's no guarantee that four of these guys make the roster. It would mean the Bucs are carrying 7 wide receivers, so they might have a tough decision to make. That's Devin Tompkins, David Moore, Raheem Jarrett, and Trey Palmer. Now, Devin Tompkins obviously was the only player who was on the team last year. Played a little bit, returned a few punts, returned a few kicks. Didn't really do much as a receiver, but he's flashed as a receiver to me. Has made multiple big plays, has good hands, sure hands. Even they had him still, the punt team and kick team. He was sure-handed with that. I think he's got a legit shot to make the roster. David Moore is the veteran of the group. Was with Dave Canales a little bit in Seattle. Was a good player for Seattle. Was a good depth player, and he's flashed as well in his time at camp. I think he is likely has a spot due to his veteran presence there. Raheem Jarrett, who was an undrafted free agent out of Maryland this past year, he's flashed. Now he did have a few drops the other day, which is kind of uncharacteristic for him in this camp. He's been pretty short-handed, but I'm excited to see Jarrett in those preseason games. I'm hoping he's able to flash a little bit more. And then Trey Palmer, and to me, Trey Palmer was sixth-round pick. The Bucs traded up to get him, so clearly they were high on him. And Trey Palmer is one of my favorite picks of the draft, but I, he continues to impress. It seems like day in and day out, he's getting better. So very impressed by Trey Palmer. He seems sure-handed. Now, I did see they had him on the punt team one time. He did muff a punt. Okay. But Trey Palmer, as far as a receiver goes, seemed pretty short-handed. Him and Kyle Trask seem to have a pretty good connection. So I'm curious to see if that shows up in the preseason games at all. On defense, now we have two defensive players here, one being cornerback Keenan Isaac. Now, Keenan Isaac is also an undrafted free agent, and he's come on. And look, the Buccaneers have a pretty much open season for depth at corner. It's Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, and then a lot of question marks. Zion McCollum is a safe bet to make the team. He's looked good, but there's got to be have more depth there. And I think a guy like Keenan Isaac has really come into his own this camp, and he's flashed a lot. So he's an undrafted free agent. He's 6'2", 186 pounds from Alabama State. So really a guy you didn't hear much of, obviously when he signed as an undrafted free agent, but heard a little bit about him in OTAs, and now the training camps here, the pads have come on, he's flashed even more. So I'm curious to see him against legit competition, against guys that he might not know the exact patterns or routes, when he goes up against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Friday. So I am very curious to see how Isaac performs and see if he can carve out a role, whether it be on special teams or as a depth cornerback for this team. And then the last one is Yaya Diaby, who was the Bucs' third-round pick from this past year. There's just something about him. There's something exciting about him. He brings a lot of energy to the football field. He really does. He's a strong guy, and even he said he has lost a good bit of pounds, close to about I think 10 pounds or so, from when he played at Louisville because he wants to be more explosive. So I think if you combine that strength with the explosiveness that he could bring, the Bucs could have a nice player on their hands here, and gives me when he talks and the way he talks, the energy he brings, and just watching him a bit more gives me like Jason Pierre-Paul vibes a little bit. Obviously, he's not going to be that from day one. Jason Pierre-Paul is a great player, but like I think as far as like his ceiling goes, I could see him being like a Jason Pierre-Paul type player, a guy who's going to be vocal, a guy who's going to be a leader, and who's going to be just a good pass rusher, a good football player. So I'm curious to see Yaya Diaby against yet again, just like Keenan Isaac, other competition. And I mentioned that there's no offensive lineman on this list. There's only one defensive lineman, and it's tough for an offensive or defensive lineman to really stand out in training camp, right? So I think it's notable and special that a guy like Yaya Diaby is standing out at this point because it's tough when you have that situation in training camp. Normally, it's the preseason games when those guys really flash. So I am very excited to see how Diaby performs. Let me know who you are excited to see. Who have been a camp standout for you? What do you think about the quarterback competition? Like I said, I know I left Mayfield off, but it's not so much a shot at him. It's just I've been more intrigued by what Trask and Walford have shown. Let me know how excited are you for the Pittsburgh Steelers matchup on Friday, the first Bucs preseason game. We'll be here to recap it all and cover it all for you guys. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and talk soon.